Basic sculpting techniques and sculpting tools. In today's tutorial, we're going to be deviating a little bit from our regular format, and I've invited Robert Burns here from Cutting Edge Sculpture. He's going to be sculpting with us today, and Robert has sculpted this ghoul and or zombie, however you are inclined to interpret it. And we use this as a means to explore some of the various uses of sculpting tools. And there's a lot of standardized sculpting tools in use in fine art and special effects sculpting. And Robert is going to walk us through a lot of the different techniques and a lot of the basic use of tools like this. Now, Robert, of course, creates the cutting edge sculpting tools. We'll be using a lot of those tools today, and also some of the more standardized wood tools that you find at a lot of ceramic suppliers and things like that. Let's get started. Now, we'll be sculpting using a monster clay medium for this zombie sculpt. And it's a good idea when you're working with monster clay medium. It's a fairly firm clay at room temperature, so it's a good idea to nuke it for a little bit. Here we zapped it for about 2 minutes, and that gives us a nice kind of a mud consistency of like a really soft oil-based clay. And that's a good stage where you can easily block it out and build it up to the shape that you want it. And one of the things we'll be doing a lot of here is once Robert's built up the basic shape that he's going to use, then he'll be doing a lot of subtractive work to bring it back down to where he wants it. So that's also one of the very nice things about working in oil-based clay is it's very easy to add and subtract. There's no right or wrong way to do this. But once he's got that shape bulked out the way he wants it, we're ready to start detailing it, and that's where Robert's going to guide us through just some of the basic use of the basic sculpting tool arsenal as it was.
Yeah, we're just going to, once all of the clay is kind of put on and placed in the rough bulk that we're looking for, we're going to start by refining that shape by starting with the coarse rakes and just pulling down the high points of the surface, working in a crisscross pattern. We're looking to bring the shapes down evenly, was what we're doing by that. And then working to finer rakes and smaller rakes, the areas like around the eye and the cheekbones where the larger rakes would just get in the way. And you can actually do some detailing, some shaping with them. These rakes are pretty rigid, and they'll handle a little bit of digging, though it's not recommended for carving trenches or anything like that with it. And here I'm just kind of cleaning up the outside profile where it goes against the wood with a wood tool. Wood tools are really good for just cutting, carving, pushing, doing a ton of different things. Some of them have, like this one here has a kind of a spoon end and even another little rake on the opposite end. But this is a really good shape for kind of just carving out, like kind of pumpkin carving there with the eye, smoothing out the edges and getting rid of kind of excess clay to clean up the profile so that it doesn't look so weird when you're looking at it straight on. This is a small wood tool that I made for myself that has got a kind of a fine tip on one side and a little smaller kind of spoon end on the other. These things are really easy to make, or the ones that you buy you can modify with some sandpaper and polishing up a little bit to make them to your liking. Now we're going to further refine and get rid of our rake marks with the wound wire rakes. What I'm using here is WWR3, and that's going to pull down further on the surface and smooth it out more, and get rid of all those more aggressive rake marks, leaving finer lines behind. And you can see that it's kind of smoothing out the contours. And on the more curved surfaces, I tend to use the round end. The flat end was for the large areas that I could get away with that. And just like the rakes, cross hatching pattern for those. And then we're going to move to a finer, same type of rake. This is WWR1, and this is a much finer one. And this one you can actually get away with completely smoothing out if you like, with just dip your finger in some alcohol and rub over it, and it'll make a completely smooth surface. But this gives it a smooth enough surface for you to start detailing, and gets rid of those. You can see the contrast between around the eye and the side of the head versus the forehead where it's a nice smooth contour. And this is PRT1, the probe tool. This is used for checking the depth of your clay, and I use it in conjunction with a little rubber stop, a little silicone piece of rubber that I cut out with a hole punch, and you slide it onto the tip of the tool, and when you press it into the clay, it will slide up the shaft of the tool and show you the depth of the clay and show you how deep the part is. Now this is particularly important for prosthetic sculptures, masks, that you're doing on a mask form, because these are things where you need to know how thick the clay is in certain areas. And I'm just probing around, checking the thickness to see if I can get away with cutting that clay out to make some exposed bone without it looking too thick or phony. And this is what we're going to cut it out with. This is SD5. It's a fine line wire tool. You can carve details with it. You can, as you can see, you can fairly well dig into the clay. And all I'm doing is just kind of slicing, pushing it down against the plastic underskull, and just peeling that out to expose that skull that's underneath. Moving on to the large kind of wire shaper tools, the wire loop tools. This is LW2. It's a double-ended bowed end tool, and these are really good for smoothing your shapes. You can go over your rake marks with that and smooth it out, as I'm doing here on the chin. And you can also do good sized lines and wrinkles with it. You can carve, depending on the size and shape of the tool, you can carve out fairly good sized wrinkles and folds and things of that nature. And we can use this tool to deepen these folds and these wrinkles and these recesses by pushing it in and kind of pulling up across the edges to round them out as we go. And you can go either in and pulling out across it. You can pull all the way across it, or kind of run it up and down the lengthwise on it just to get rid of that tooled look. And we're going to switch over to back to the wooden tool. This is the homemade wooden tool I did out of a wooden dowel, for mainly going to smooth out the eyelid, and we're going to conform that eyelid using the spoon end so that it looks like it's stretched across the eyeball. And it's pretty common in sculpture that you're going to bounce back and forth a lot. You're going to find yourself, you're going to find shapes that you're not happy with, and you're going to want to build it up and go back and then tear it down again. And it's a constant kind of push and pull to get to the goal, to get the look that you want. So there is a lot of repetition of efforts, a lot of duplication of efforts, but that's just part of the process. You'll see things that you walk away and come back and find something new that you didn't see before that needs to be fixed. At the point now we're ready to start detailing and texturing. So we're just ripping some lines kind of here and there to give it some texture, to give it some character. Doing some forehead lines and making some kind of wrinkle texture on the face, which eventually, since he is a dried out, rotted corpse, the whole thing's going to be covered in that sort of texture. There's not going to be a lot of major features. Not lots of folds or anything like that. This is mostly just a kind of wrinkled, flattened, dried out skin, like a husk that's just kind of clinging to the skull. And now we're just working in covering ground, getting these wrinkles nice and deep, and trying different sized wrinkles and lines to give it some depth. You always want to layer your detail, and you want to layer your texture. You don't want to just try and cut in one size line all over the thing and expect that it's going to look natural, because it very much won't. You want to go in the direction that is natural. You know, you see how they're curving, you know, kind of across the forehead and up, kind of radiating out from around the eye, and that's how wrinkles go. And now I'm just kind of mapping out where the pore texture is going to go. And it's just poking the corner of that angled tool into the clay. Now it looks really aggressive. This looks like really kind of wacky skin texture, but once we wash that down with a solvent and get the whole thing smoothed down, that's going to knock that back quite a bit. And now we're just using the brass twist rake to further refine some of those harsher deep lines. And just like we did on the other side, we're getting rid of the heavy look of those creases. And this is ENC1. It's a wire wrapped tool, and this has the advantage of really being able to dig in and rake out your contours as you go. It's a lot more aggressive than the brass twist tool, so you can really get into your creases and folds and pull them out and really make deep contours with it. And then of course you come in and refine it later. Now this is another fine detail tool, and that one's got an angled tip that is SD2, and we're using that because it can sneak in under that eyelid and kind of carve out the back so that we get a nice thickness to that eyelid so that it looks natural. You know, so it looks like there used to be an eyeball in there. And we just carve out everything that we don't want. And now we're going to use the other end of the tool for some finer wrinkles. This guy you can use the edge, the side of the tool, or use it broadside to get different size wrinkles. You can lay down a piece of plastic sheet, cling wrap, or a sandwich bag, which is what I'm using here, and get even softer, more subtle wrinkles put into it. This is a makeup stipple sponge, or reticulated foam, Scott foam. It's had the edges cut off and kind of rounded to make it smoother. This is just to take off the clay crumbs, where we're just cleaning off all the stuff from the leftover from the tooling of it. It's had quite a bit, so we're going to clean this off so that we can then brush down all those rough edges and that rough texture with naphtha. And that's just a cheap chip brush that's had the bristles cut in half, and a little cup full of naphtha. And we're going to use as little solvent as we can to wash this down with. We're going to let the brush do most of the work. You don't want to get it too wet, because then you just make a really messy clay slurry on it. And you can see I'm brushing rather aggressively with it. Now, I'm not pushing really hard, but I am kind of getting in there and trying on purpose to push that clay around a bit. So that's why we don't want to get it too wet. So if it gets too wet, then yeah, like I said, you're going to fill in all that texture and detail instead of smoothing it out. And in addition to the chip brush, we're going to do some more details with a hog's hair brush, like what you would use for oil paints. And these are just cheap hobby store variety ones. You know, the solvent and the clay tend to tear up the brushes. Don't spend a lot of money on good brushes for that. And then we're going to just do the same thing, work the entire surface, smooth it all out, and then we're going to give it some time to flash off. Let it sit for about an hour or two and dry up the surface. Now, this here is the wire wrinkle tool, WW1, and the end I'm using here is 4 straight tines that do really nice fine wrinkle texture. As you can see, I'm dragging a crisscross pattern. You can see just about everything is done in that, you know, X fashion for the details. Now this side is a lot rougher. This has a lot more tines and they're bent so that you can really just dig into the surface of the clay. And it's the same as everything else. You're doing a nice X pattern, crisscrossing like an elongated X to really dig in there and make a nice rough wrinkle texture. And we're going to finish it off just by repeating the last steps, brushing off the crumbs with the stipple sponge, and we're going to wash it down again with the solvent and let it dry and call it done. I only did this for the one, for 2 times, just to get a couple different layers of texture. But you can certainly go back and forth as many times as need be to suit your character. You're gonna find that the more back and forth that you do, the more detail, the more layers that you're able to add, you're only gonna help to make your forms even better. And here's our finished zombie ghoul sculpt.
And that concludes our walk through the basic use of sculpting tools and sculpture techniques. And now our finished zombie sculpture can be molded a variety of ways. For this particular piece, we use sulfur-free clay, so he's ready to be molded with platinum silicone. And we'll be covering that in another video in the future, and then we'll be making resin and some rubber casts from this mold. So I thank Robert for coming out from Florida to make this video with us. And of course, you can find the cutting-edge sculpting tools on our website at brickintheyard.com. And although you can get Robert's tools from a variety of distributors, it's important to note that Biddy Mold Supply, actually our shipping manager, Larry Hall, actually blesses the tools before they are shipped out. So that's something unique to Biddy Mold Supply, and that's why we encourage you to get your cutting-edge sculpture tools at Biddy Mold Supply. And of course, you can find out more about Robert's other tools and other products at cuttingedgesculpture.com.